Well, hello Internet, and welcome to part 4 of my Design Patterns video tutorial series. Today we're going to talk about the observer pattern. And don't worry, if you're just interested in the observer pattern, this video is 100% totally self-contained. However, if you need to brush up on basic OOP principles, check out the 2 videos that I linked to above. I'm going to start off with the presentation format just like in previous videos, and then I'm going to show you a UML diagram and then show you all the code involved in the observer pattern. So when do you use the observer pattern? When you need many other objects to receive an update when another object changes. So for example, let's say we have a subject or publisher object that is going to represent thousands of individual stocks in the stock market. If you would need to send updates to multiple observers or subscribers, you would use the observer pattern to do that. So what is the benefit of the observer pattern? Well, like the strategy pattern, you get the benefits of loose coupling. The subject or publisher doesn't need to know anything about the observers or subscribers. I'm referring to them as 2 different things because I think publisher makes more sense, but basic jargon in OOP concepts says that we should use subject and observers. The only negative of the observer pattern is the subject or publisher may send updates that don't matter to observers that are subscribed. And this is exactly what the observer pattern looks like using a UML diagram. Over here you have the subject, and it is going to have these 3 methods defined, being register a new observer. Here's an observer over here. So it's going to have the capability to register new observers, and in this situation we're going to save all the observers in an array list. Also unregister, which means they'll no longer receive messages from subject, and also the capability to notify the observer whenever any changes are made. Then of course you're going to implement an interface for the main observer, and then you're going to create classes that are going to implement this observer interface. And in this situation we could say that this class down here is only going to be interested in the current price for IBM, and this one's going to only be interested in the current price of Apple. But they are all going to use the update method to update the information inside of them. And the common definition for the observer pattern is a software design pattern in which an object, called the subject, maintains a list of its dependents, called observers, and notifies them automatically of any state changes that occur over here in subject, usually by calling one of their methods. In this situation, and in most situations, that method is going to be called update. So let's get into the code. Okay, I have all these lined up already, so here's subject.java, and this is going to be an interface that we're going to create. It's going to be very simple. We're just going to go public interface subject. And like I said before, it's going to handle adding, deleting, and updating all the observers. Public, and this is an interface, so we're not really going to define anything here. We're going to go public void unregister. And actually one of you guys, right before I decided to do this tutorial, asked me to use the observer pattern with threads. So first I'm going to present it in a simple way, and then I'm going to present it using threads. But you definitely don't need to use threads if you want to use the observer pattern. It has nothing to do with threads. And there you go. There's your subject interface. And now I'm going to come in here and use the observer.java interface, or create it. And it's also going to be simple, public, even more simple, interface, observer. And then we're going to go public void update. And in this situation, I'm going to be playing around with stocks. So I'm going to go IBM price. It's going to be a double, Apple's price, and that's not Apple spelled wrong, that is their stock symbol. And let's say that we're also going to pass updates in regards to Google's stock price. There you go, all done. That's all set up. So now I'm going to create another one of these guys called stockgrabber.java, and it is going to implement the subject interface. So we're going to go public class stockgrabber implements subject, which is the interface we just created, and then it's going to give me an error message. And if I zoom in here, it's going to say the type stockgrabber must implement the inherited abstract methods. I'm going to say sure. So that's going to save me a whole bunch of time. And now I'm going to come in here. Remember I said I'm going to store all of my observers in an array list, and it's going to store a bunch of observers, and I'm just going to call them observers. And then I'm going to create private fields that are going to represent the current price for all these different stocks that I'm going to be playing around with here. And before I get into these classes, I'm going to come down here and go stock grabber, create the constructor for this. And it's just going to define my array list. And of course it's going to give me an error that I need to import the array list library. So do that. And there it is. And that's all I'm going to do inside of that. So now let's get into these unimplemented methods we have down here. I'm going to call this new observer just to make that a little bit easier to understand and remember. And I'm just going to go observers and add, and there's new observer. I'm just adding that new observer that we're going to create here in a minute to our array list. So pretty simple stuff. Leave any questions or comments below if you have any questions or comments. And then I'm going to implement unregistered, and in this situation I'm going to call this delete observer just so I know exactly what's going on with that. And then I'm going to go int observer index, get the index for whatever observer is being sent over here to be deleted, index of, and then delete observer is the guy I'm going to use here. There we go. And just so that I know something happened here, I'm going to say system out and observer, and I'm going to notify here on the screen that this guy's been deleted. And I'm just going to go observer. Because the array list is going to put the first observer in the 0 index, I'm going to increment this by 1 just so that I get the right observer, or at least it makes more sense. And I'm just going to say deleted. And now that I know which observer index is going to be deleted, I just need to call the array list and remove, and there you are. So that is going to delete observers from my array list so that I will no longer send them messages, because that would just be silly. And then notify observer is going to cycle through all the observers and notify them of any price changes that occur. And I'm going to put this in an enhanced for loop. So we're going to go observer, which is the type. Observer is going to be the temporary holding cell, and observers is going to be the array list. And then I just got to go observer and call the update method that I'm going to create here in a second. And it automatically is going to put all that information in there for me. So that saves me some time. That's awesome. Then I'm going to create a couple other methods that I'm going to use later on. And all the code is available underneath this video in a link. So go get it if you actually want to read the comments, because it's heavily commented. Alright, so I'm going to give them the option to change prices for all the different stocks and then notify observers of any other changes that occur. So double new IBM price. And I'm just going to say this, IBM price is equal to new IBM price. And then I have to go notify observer, which is the method that we just created right here. So this is going to notify all the observers after the price has been changed for IBM. And then we're just going to do exactly the same thing for all the other stocks that we're going to be monitoring. And this could easily be turned into a real world application that gets real stocks and all that stuff without any problem at all. And whenever I implement threads, it's going to make it even easier to do that. And then here we're just going to go AAPL, which is going to represent Apple, and then notify the observers. And then here we're going to do the same thing for Google. So if you didn't know the stock symbol for these, now you do. And there we are. We're done. We just created that guy. So now we have to create stock observer, which is going to implement the observer interface that we just created. Pretty simple. Just go public class implements the observer interface. There's going to be a whole bunch of these, and it's public, not pubic. And of course, it's going to give me an error message again. Stock observer must implement inherited abstract method over blah, blah, blah. And I'm just going to click on that and say, okay, do that for me. And you could do this in different ways depending upon whether you're monitoring one stock or two. And that's actually going to be your homework, because you guys ask me for homework all the time. In this situation, each observer is going to monitor all 3 stock prices for now. And then I'm going to have to use a static that's going to be used as a counter. So I'll be able to attach a special number to each one of the observers. I'm just going to call it that, observer ID tracker. And of course, each class is only going to have one of these that they're going to share, so it works great as a counter. And then I'm going to give each individual observer object that is created a special observer ID, and that's not going to be static, of course. And then so I can make references to the stock grabber object, I'm going to go private, and I'm going to call it subject. I'm going to refer to it as the subject interface that it implements, and that's just going to provide me access to that guy so that I can run different methods. Public, the constructor, and it's going to be passed a reference to the current stock grabber object, and I'm just going to store the reference of that stock grabber object in our own personal stock grabber object that's assigned to this observer. And then I'm also going to give each observer its own ID. And I'm going to make sure that I increment it like that, which is just going to add 1. Remember, I want to refer to these observers starting with the index 1, even though in the array list they're going to start out in the 0 index. And I'm just doing this so that whenever I start playing around with these, it'll be easier to understand what I'm doing. And why don't I say new observer and then just print out its observer ID number. so that we know that an observer has been created. And of course, put out inside of there. And this is the reason why we needed our own stock grabber object that references the main guy, because we need to register or add our new observer that we just created to stock grabber's array list. And then we get into the class that we always are going to have to create here, which is update. And let's just jump up here, and I'm just going to paste that inside of there is equal to IBM price that's been passed over. And then in this situation, I'm going to go this, which is a reference to the object or the observer that we're playing with here. And then after the prices have been updated for each of the observers, I'm going to print the prices, which is going to print them out for us. And it's upset because it doesn't exist, but it will now. Print the prices, right like that. And I'm going to go system out, print line. And the first thing I'm going to print is the observer ID so that we know that there's more than one observer. There we are. And then I'm going to call a new line and then say IBM plus IBM price plus, put this on a new line, Apple stock price, Apple price, new line, Google's price, and then throw in another new line. And that's it. We just implemented everything we have there, of course. Get rid of that. And there we are. So let's file save it. And then like I promised you in the past, we're now going to use classes that are just going to implement public static void main and then work with the objects inside of it. And grabstocks.java is going to do that for us. So we're going to go public class grabstocks public static void. And if anything doesn't make sense, get the code, it's commented, and then it will make sense. Probably 90% of the questions I get are answered in the code that I reference all the time. So what are we going to do here? We're going to create the subject object, and it will handle updating all of the observers for us, as well as deleting and adding them. So just go stock grabber like that. I'm going to call it stock grabber is equal to new stock grabber. So let's call that constructor. It's going to handle everything for us. And of course, that's this guy over here, stock grabber implement subject. Okay. Alright, so now that we have a guy that's going to go out there and get our stocks for us, we need to create an observer that will be sent updates from subject or publisher, whatever you want to call it. So I'm just going to go observer 1 is equal to new stock observer, and I'm going to pass it stock grabber, which is this guy that we just created right here, so that it'll be able to access those methods that we were talking about before. And now I'm going to be able to go stock grabber set IBM price, for example, and come in here and go 197. Copy that. And then we're just going to do the same thing for Apple and the same thing for Google. And I'm sure you remember whenever I created those methods, I just did it a second ago. And these are actually real prices. I just actually checked them. And if I file save that and execute, you can see here, new observer's been created right there. And there is the observer 1. And then as it changes the prices, each time there's a price change, this observer is notified. So when IBM's price changes, there you go. And there's Apple, which hasn't been changed yet. But then Apple is changed, and so forth and so on. However, it looks like we have an error here, so let's jump over and see what it is. I forgot to print it out. Not a big deal. So, copy, paste inside of there, and then just change this to GOG. File save it. Awesome. Execute. And now you can see everything's been updated. You can also see how it is being notified one by one. So what happens if we create another observer? Let's do that. Paste that in there. Let's just call it observer 2. Don't need to change anything else. And then we're just going to go in here and make price changes again. File save, piece of cake, execute, and you can now see each one of them is going to be updated. There's new observer, there's the first pass through. This is whenever the second observer is created, and you can see one by one they are automatically changed right there on the fly. So that's pretty cool. You can also see that if I go stock grabber unregistered observer 1, for example, file save it and execute it. Boom. And you can see right there, observer 1 is deleted, and after it's deleted, it no longer receives updates. So that's pretty cool. So now I'm going to show you how to use threads with an observer pattern, which is a pretty common thing to occur. And to do that, I'm going to go to getthestock.java, start working with this guy. And I'm also going to do a review here, kind of to a certain extent, decimal format. Let's see if I can do this, because I'm improving this. That's import. Okay, so I know I need to format the decimal, as you're going to see here in a second. So this is totally improved, but I should be able to do it. And this is going to allow you to use threads. So we're going to implement runnable. And this is just going to allow me to use threads without having to waste my extends so that I'll be able to use more than one class. I'm using the runnable interface. So that's pretty cool. And then I'm going to go Well, actually, I'm going to show you something here. Let's say that I wanted to set it so that the thread is updated based off of a start time that I define. I could do it this way. I'm going to have my stock, which is going to be the name for the stock, and I'm also going to have a price. That's what each of these threads is going to have. I'm going to need a reference to stock grabber so that I'll be able to call its methods. I'm going to store a reference to stock grabber inside of there. I'm going to go get the stock. So whenever this is called, it's going to receive a reference to stock grabber. If I wanted to go new start time, which is going to represent how long to wait before the thread is executed, so how often to change the price. And I could go string. I'm of course going to need whatever the stock is or the stock name is, and I'm also going to need the price. So then I'm going to go this stock grabber, just like we did before. I'm going to store a reference to the stock grabber object that's being used over in grabstocks.java. And then if I wanted to set the start time, of course I just go new start time. Pretty easy. But in this situation I'm not going to do that because I just think it's added information. I'm going to go stock is equal to new stock, and I'm going to go price is equal to new price. And then of course, since this is implementing the runnable interface, well, this guy's up here is complaining. I knew this already, but what's it going to be complaining about? It's going to say type get the stock must implement the unherited abstract method, which is going to be run, of course. And there's run down there. This is fun to do this. I don't know if you guys like when I improv and just write code out of my head, but I definitely enjoy it. So now I'm going to go create a for loop, and let's say that I want to create new prices or change the prices 20 times. Well, that's what that's going to do. Now, since I'm using this interface to pause it for 2 seconds, that's what that guy does. It's going to pause it so that it waits 2 seconds before it executes the code that I have down below. And right here, if you wanted to make this change, this is where you would do that. You'd do something like paste that in there and then multiply this and then go in and change that to 1000. That would allow you to change how long the program waits before it executes, which I've shown many times before. And then I'm going to cheat here, catch interrupted exception, E, and I'm just going to cheat, like I said, and just put that in there. I know that's bad. And then I'm going to create a double random number, and I'm going to say something like random. Because what I want to do here with this is I want to have it kick out a value for random that's going to be between -3 cents and +3 cents. Well, to do that, you're going to multiply it times what you want to create here. So that's going to be 0.06. And then the result of that, you're going to subtract 0.03. That's how you're able to get negative random numbers. And then I'm going to need decimal format. I don't know if I imported that above or not. Yes, I knew I needed to do that. And this is just going to make sure that it comes out using only 2 digits. So I'm going to come in here and put that there and define $sign. So that's just going to require it to have only 2 decimal places as well as 1 individual dollar up here. So that's all that is. Simple stuff. And then I'm going to go price is equal to, well, whenever you use decimal format, it's going to kick out a string. So we need to convert it back into a double. So I'm going to go value of, and I'm going to go def format, and then I'm going to take price and add to it whatever the random number is. That's pretty cool. Whoops, there we go. Alright, so now I have to call the update for each of the individual stocks, and I'm thinking there's a better way to do this, but right now I'm sort of blanking. So I'm just going to say if the stock name is equal to IBM, I'm going to call stock grabber set IBM price, and I'm going to send it the price like that. And it's giving me an error. The reason why is set IBM price stock grabber right here. I have it saved as a subject. See? Right there. However, set IBM price isn't inside of subject. However, it is inside of stock grabber. See? There it is. Set IBM price. So, no big deal. Just need to jump over here and cast it. So I'm going to go cast it to stock grabber that does contain that method. And then just throw that right there. And that should clear up. And it did. So that's nice. And we're going to do the same thing for Apple and Google. And let's say that I also want to print out a little message here. I'm just playing around. I'm just thinking in my head. System. All of this code is also going to be in the link underneath the video. So what do I got to print out here? Let's say I want to print out the stock name. And I also want to put a colon inside of there and a space. And I'm going to use the format again. Now in this situation, price plus rand num. I don't care if that's a string. Actually, I want it to be a string. And then we're going to put a space inside of there. And then let's format again. format, and print out the random number. So it's sort of like going to be like, okay, this stock is down or up so many pennies. I don't know. Let's throw in a print line just to cause it to create a new line. And I think I got everything that I need. Let's go back and let's find out. So we're back over into grab stocks. And if I want to create a thread inside of here, give myself some room, I'm going to create 3 threads. So runnable, and call the first one get IBM is equal to new get the stock. And what are we going to do? We're going to come over here. And what are we doing? We have stock grabber, int, and all this other stuff. So that's what we need to pass to it. So that's cool. So we're going to go stock grabber. We're going to pass that reference to the stock grabber object. Pass 2 over there, even though I'm not going to use it, which is going to represent how many seconds to wait before I change the price. IBM's the name of it, and 197.00 is going to be my starting off price. Let's copy that, paste. Like I said, it's going to create 3 threads using the runnable interface, and I'm using the runnable interface so I don't waste my one and only extendable class option that we all get at birth. So there's APL, Google, and then I'm going to pass it the same price as it originally had. And then, of course, after we create these threads, we have to call for the code in run to execute. So thread get IBM start. And that's all this line of code does, is it says, hey, whatever is going on inside of the run method, run it. And there you are. And let's execute it and see if it works. And it is working, which is really cool. And you can see here, the observer, well, it's actually only printing out the second observer because remember we deleted the first one. But you can see here, as everything is changing with all these individual stocks, it's automatically updating all of the observers. So I hope you thought that was a pretty cool tutorial. It was a lot of fun to make. Can't believe I got it the first time. Another thing is that one of you guys out there at the last school, and I provide a reference above, is working on a tutorial that will cover how to create social networks like Facebook. And this is a totally non-sponsored, free shout out. He asked me for a shout out, and I promised him I would do it about 3 videos ago, but I'm doing it right now. So if you want to check out his channel, there's a link above. And from now on, if you guys want me to do shout outs, the way I'm going to handle them is the last person to ask for a shout out on my most recent video gets a shout out in the next video. And I'm not accepting anything for a shout out. This is 100% unsponsored. It's free. So good luck, and it's going to be pure luck of the draw from now on. Leave any questions or comments below or ask for shout outs. Otherwise, till next time.